Today's character is a pretty popular one right now, but to truly understand their situation, I want to talk a little about their home series in the context of Smash Bros. But Pokémon needs little introduction in the first place. One of Nintendo's cornerstones and its second biggest franchise, the series has sold nearly 300 million total copies across all its games, according to the video game sales wiki, with new entries Sun and Moon tipping the scales at an estimated 10 million plus sold in just its first few weeks. From the mainline RPGs, to spin-off titles, to all kinds of merchandise featuring the 800 plus Pokemon species to date, the series has grown strong from its humble roots and become an icon worldwide. Which of course means we've had a lot of Pokemon content in Smash. Smash 4 features 6 playable Pokemon currently, and 3 others have sat on the roster in previous entries. Beyond playable characters, there's also been 8 stages, a long list of music to accompany said stages, over 150 trophies, and an entire set of items devoted to summoning various mons from the series' entire history. So yeah, pretty big deal in Smash, and it'll presumably continue to be since the series just keeps growing. And yet, Pokemon characters tend to get overlooked when it comes to roster speculation. You'd think a cornerstone franchise with such a gigantic and highly varied cast of characters would get a lot of attention from speculators, and yet it doesn't happen. Even though Pokemon is the only franchise to get at least one newcomer in every entry so far. Well, I think a lot of it has to do with who does the most speculation, or the loudest speculation. For whatever reason, a lot of the people who talk a lot about Smash and make roster predictions are also the people who lost interest in Pokemon early on. Or who knows, maybe they cut ties because they were afraid of being made fun of. Whatever the reason, this is why we get so many rosters that stick only to the mons those people grew up with. That's why you see a lot from generations 1 to 3 tacked on to so many of them. Or why people assume new Smash games will cycle out the newest Pokemon character as if being newer made them less important. And that's a problem we run into a lot with Smash speculation in general. Only looking at the characters we're already aware of, and especially only the ones we grew up with. Because Sakurai and his team care about newer characters too, and with Smash 4 in particular, they went out of their way to look for new blood who could do new things. So let's take all that into account going forward, because our featured character today is one of Pokemon's newest stars. Decidueye is the fully evolved form of Rowlet, one of the brand new starter Pokemon in Sun and Moon. It's classified as the Aeroquill Pokemon with, if the Pokedex is to be believed, an average height of 5¼ feet tall and an average weight of just a hair over 80 pounds, which is pretty damn big for a bird. Decidueye's design brings to mind the figure of a silent, stealthy archer, able to bend parts of its body to create a bow and use its own feathers as arrows. It bears the unusual and unexpected type combination of grass and ghost, which was why it managed to still surprise people despite its design being leaked several months ahead of time. It's really taken off among the Pokemon fanbase as the most popular of the Alola starters, though Primarina isn't far behind. And between that popularity and the fact that Ash is getting a Rowlet in the anime series, there's an argument to be made that Decidueye is the Greninja of the 7th generation. Like with a lot of modern Pokemon, Decidueye draws inspiration from several sources and ties them together into something all its own. On the surface, well, it's a somewhat humanoid owl that steals a page from Robin Hood, but there's actually more going on here. You see, Decidueye's long legs and preference towards staying on terra firma seems to be inspired by the stilt owls, 4 species that were native to the Hawaiian Islands, until they were driven to extinction a little over 1,000 years ago by a number of factors. But that may not be the main reason Decidueye picked up the ghost typing. After all, they aren't dead, just associated with the ghostly and occult. Which brings to mind just how many ancient cultures worldwide associated owls with death and occult magic, sometimes even considering them emissaries of the underworld. In fact, Decidueye also draws part of its look from the endangered Pueo owls native to Hawaii. And according to legend, they just so happen to be one of the forms that ancestral spirits known as Aumakua can take. I've actually seen a surprising amount of people who think Decidueye has a legit shot at getting into this Smash 4.5 on the Switch that seems to be in the cards. To their credit, it seems like they're catching on to how big a deal relevance can be. But I've also seen many of them assume Decidueye would get the nod in order to complete a starter triangle with Greninja and Charizard. Similar arguments popped up for Sceptile during DLC speculation since the relevant games at the time were remakes of its home region. That's not what the dev team looks for, guys. They're not in this to fill some arbitrary quota, no more than they're looking for reps or filling slots. That said, being a grass type is a big reason why Decidueye has such a legitimate chance. As Sakurai has said, being able to do unique things is a major point in a character's favor, and plant-based attacks are almost completely non-existent among the current cast. It's not about shoving a grass starter onto the roster for the sake of having a grass starter, but we don't have a character with the type of powers that a grass type has, and it gives Decidueye a wide open niche for the taking. That is why I actually think Decidueye is the second most likely newcomer for Smash 4.5, only behind the Inklings. Our target's in sight, now it's time to take aim. What could Decidueye be like in Smash? So, fortunately, appearance wouldn't be all that hard. Between the in-game animations and the lore we've been provided for the Rowlet line, we have a lot to work with. Decidueye's default stance would have his wings folded into a cloak-like shape just like in Sun and Moon. You keep the wings folded when walking, but unfurl them and hold them out in a steady position when running to give off the feeling of an imposing cloaked figure descending on their target. The strange finger-like appendages on the ends of the wings are used to pull the vine tassels to create a bowstring and to pull back and fire feathers as arrows, and they'd also presumably be how Decidueye would pick up items. Though we're probably talking a pretty bad throwing arm since he still looks unwieldy at grasping larger objects. Alternate colors are kind of a big deal for Pokemon characters, since the powers that be are very insistent on making sure they still feel true to the design. Decidueye's default color scheme uses natural tones befitting a grass type, and since the cowl and tassels/bowstrings are made of leaves and vines, they need to remain at least some shade of green for most of the alts. Hey, it's still more freedom than what Sonic and Pac-Man got. But there are a couple potential exceptions. An autumn-themed alt with orange or reddish leaves, and a dead leaf alt where the leaves are a faded brown. Hey, when you're part ghost type, you get associated with dead stuff. Also worth mentioning that we're probably not looking at the shiny palette as a potential alt. Most Pokemon characters have gone without those in Smash, for whatever reason. So while getting Decidueye to look right wouldn't be a problem, it's the animations and mannerisms that they need to pay special attention to. You're basically representing an entire species here, so it's all about nailing down how they act and how they do battle. Decidueyes are described as fighting like snipers, taking their time sneaking around and finding a good position, and striking opponents down with pinpoint accuracy. They're said to be very cool-headed and skilled at avoiding attention in a skirmish, but are easily flustered if someone gets the drop on them. So to portray that, most of Decidueye's animations would be very quiet. Footfalls, simpler attacks like tilts, wing beats when jumping, and any vocal grunts, or squawks in this case. But whenever Decidueye would get hit, the voice clips would be just as loud as anyone else's. Also, you could give his roll dodge a similar vanishing effect to Rosalina or Palutena's, by having him disappear into the shadows and reappear a short distance away. With the look of a ghostly sniper nailed down, now let's get into the ideas behind the character concept itself. So, playstyle is pretty much a no-brainer. If archery is your forte and the driving force in much of your moveset, you zone. But Decidueye could do more than just pick a spot and shoot feathers. There could be more ways to set opponents up to make your job easier in the long term. And I'm talking more than just traps. More on that later. So, the Rowlet line's stats were not what a lot of people were expecting. We all thought we were getting a swift archer who stayed on the move while pelting enemies with a hail of shots. What we got is more of a patient sniper who relies on things other than speed. So, considering Sakurai's team would, in theory, have been made aware of Decidueye's planned stats during the design process several months ago, we gotta give this thing mediocre mobility to keep things true to character. If the size and weight have you scratching your head a little, keep in mind that Pokemon characters are almost always sized up to work better in Smash's environment. Mewtwo is the only one who keeps his listed size. So with that in mind, Decidueye would be a little bigger than the 5'3" the Dex claims they are on average, and a little heavier than 80.7 pounds. But still rather light to fit the concept and feel true to character. We are still talking about a bird after all. The fast fall speed comes from a combination of not being all that aerodynamic since Decidueye's wings have evolved to function more like arms, and to be susceptible to more combos for longer percentage ranges. See, I figure one way to portray getting flustered easily when someone gets the drop on them is to make Decidueye's disadvantaged state really vulnerable. That said, you'd still have ways of getting out of trouble if you got a chance to breathe, especially since those strange mutant wings would still be functional enough to pull off multiple jumps. I'm thinking a total of about 4. Like what Pid and Patu have. But there's one more thing we can give Decidueye to really let him stand out. You see, we have 4 archery moves in Smash so far, the neutral specials of the Lynx and Pits. We want Decidueye's archery to be much more integral than that, so why not work it into a couple smash attacks? Decidueye's forward and up smashes would have him pull back and fire a feather arrow for a long-ranged hit. But there's more. You could also angle these just like some other forward smashes by holding up or down during the forward smash's animation, or holding left and right during the up smash, the first up smash in the series to have this ability. And if you charge them, the arrows would gain little additional power but significantly more range and velocity. It wouldn't hit as hard as most smash attacks to keep him from killing super early on hits near the blast zones, but they give Decidueye long-range pokes and zoning options at a multitude of angles to harass foes from almost any direction. And now we move on to the moveset proper, where Pokemon characters shine. Almost every single species has a long list of moves they can learn in the games, giving us everything we need to create a cornerstone for a moveset. That said, you want to be smart about which moves you use and which you pass up on. Know when to use existing moves and when to create something new. If you force them in where they don't fit, you risk the moveset feeling too gimmicky. So with that in mind, there are a few moves in particular we can pull straight from the Rowlet line's level set that fit Decidueye's character concept perfectly. Fury Attack can be used as a jab combo, a rapid flurry of slices with either bladed leaves or held arrowheads, whichever would look better. Speaking of which, Leaf Blade could go into several A moves through slicing opponents with the curved leaves shown in the move's new animation in Gen 7, as it'd work better as a central part of Decidueye's normals than as a single special. His down smash in particular could be an assassin-like two-sided slash with a blade in each hand, which would be one of Decidueye's main kill options and a way to compensate for the forward and up smashes being better at zoning than ending stocks. The basic flying move Peck could even be worked in as a pummel, and considering those weird wingtip feather things wouldn't be very good at grabbing opponents, it'd really add to the feeling of an awkward and unwieldy grab game. Unfortunately, it's not a lot of moves to start with, but the good news is we have other sources to help plug the gaps, like the lore on the Sun and Moon website. According to it, the Rowlet line is capable of powerful kicks, which we can use for moves like a dash attack, an aerial or two, and particularly by making Decidueye's down air a swooping dive kick that comes directly from one of its attack animations. There's also a bit in the lore of the middle form Dartrix about being so aware of enemies' presence that they can fling feathers at him without even having to turn and look. We could work that in by having Decidueye not look back when performing a back air. Maybe the move itself could even be some kind of 3-leaf short-range spread shot. And we can also take some inspiration from other sources as well. One of Decidueye's idle animations could be the one from Sun and Moon where it uses one wing to brush off the other. The wings themselves can be used for wing sweeps for various tilts and aerials that wouldn't hit very hard and be for creating a little bit of space more than anything. We've established that the weird wing arms wouldn't be good at grappling, so maybe Decidueye's throws would all involve tossing an opponent, or shoving them onto the ground, and then sticking an arrow in them. Or maybe it'd be too similar to the Spaceys. Hey, not my call to make. Finally, I'm no expert on the topic, but I could definitely see Sakurai's team doing some research into real-world archery techniques. They went all out on Little Mac's animations to make him feel like a real boxer, so why not make Decidueye feel like a true master bowman? But we're missing one more piece of the puzzle to tie Decidueye's entire concept together and bring in some parts of the line's level set that we passed on before. Now, it's time to show off Decidueye's special moves. Most neutral specials on Pokemon characters tend to be moves that are strongly associated with them, and so Decidueye's would be none other than its signature move, Spirit Shackle. In the main series, this move is a physical ghost-type attack with 80 base power and 100% accuracy in normal circumstances. Depicted as a feather arrow shrouded in ghostly energy, it damages the target and prevents them from escaping battle or switching out by pinning their shadow to the ground. In Smash, Decidueye would perform this move by firing the arrow at a diagonally upward angle. At its apex, it'd perform a backward loop and then descend at a downward angle until it hit a surface or traveled a certain distance. On contact with a surface, it created a shadowy semicircular hitbox, and any opponent who takes damage from the shadow would lose the ability to move or jump for a short time. They wouldn't be truly pinned, they could still attack, and movement animations would still play out without them going anywhere, and if they jumped, they'd go through their jump squat and then immediately resume their grounded animations. They could also still shield and dodge. Again, roll dodges wouldn't go anywhere, so it's up to the Decidueye player to time their attacks to best take advantage of their opponent in their trapped state. Or just run up and grab them, but you have to be closer and Decidueye wouldn't get as much of a reward off a grab. You could hold B to increase the distance the arrow would fly, and the arrow itself would only deal Fireball less damage and minor knockback. Since you want to hit with the landing hitbox on this one. And don't worry, those of you who are having visions of getting shackled and then carried off the sides by something like the Town and City platforms, a failsafe could be coded in that makes the shackle effect end immediately if the victim gets too close to a blast zone. Decidueye's side special would let him fling around something other than arrows, Razor Leaf. The move's been a low-level grass staple since Gen 1, doing physical grass damage with 55 base power, 95% accuracy, and a raised crit rate. Ivysaur had another version of Razor Leaf in Brawl, but both mons use the move in different ways. You already have two specials on unrelated characters that are both named Thunders, so it can still work. Decidueye would use his own take on Razor Leaf by performing a quick pivot and flinging a bladed leaf like a throwing knife. Holding up or down during the spin would make the leaf curve in that direction on release. The shot would start out moving fast, but slow down a bit as it sailed, making it about half the distance of Final Destination before disappearing. It wouldn't deal much damage, but you probably saw that coming. The move is designed to be a quick poke or zoning tool that works best when you don't have the time for something more complicated. The arrows fired in Decidueye's forward and up smashes are stronger, but don't travel as far unless the smashes are charged. Knowing when to aim an arrow and when you're better off just throwing a Razor Leaf is key. Decidueye's up special could borrow from that flying type it had in its earlier forms, with none other than Brave Bird. This move's been a staple of physical flyers since its creation in Gen 4, with a high 120 base power and 100% accuracy, though it makes you take recoil damage equal to 1/3 of the damage dealt. It's strong and useful, but it has its drawbacks. It also picked up a really cool animation in Gen 6. Brave Bird and Smash could be a move with two inputs, like Shulk's Air Slash. The first press would have Decidueye swoop upward in a quick rising arc with wings spread, reaching about the distance between the first and second platforms on Battlefield. Pressing B a second time would make Decidueye level out and launch forward at high speed for a distance equal to about half of FD. It'd be a Dragon Punch type move with a twist, serving as an unconventional recovery option since the horizontal part makes it something you'd want to pull off while you're still a ways off stage. The first hit would combo into the second and deal solid damage and knockback, but since the second hit's knockback would be more horizontal, it'd be more of a desperation move or low percent combo finisher, not something you'd use to cheese your way into early kills off the top. No stairway here. And when I say desperation move, well, Brave Bird would have significant end lag and or landing lag after use, especially if you perform the second part, making it highly punishable if you threw it out carelessly. It also wouldn't be able to snap to the ledge until the apex of the first part, which could potentially be trouble if Decidueye had to recover from below the stage against someone good at putting hitboxes there. I did consider having it deal recoil damage, but I decided it didn't fit the concept the way Flare Blitz's recoil fits Charizard. Remember, it's about figuring out how best to interpret the attacks. Sometimes it means not transferring every trait of them over for the sake of a more solid concept. You know how I said Decidueye's setups would involve more than just traps? Meet the reason why. Foresight. In the games, it's a gimmick move at best, resetting any stat modifiers to the user's accuracy or target's evasion, and allowing normal and fighting type moves to bypass an enemy ghost type's immunity to them. But in Smash, here's where things get interesting. On use, a fan-shaped area in front of Decidueye's head would glow a visible violet for a brief moment. Any opponents touching the area, who aren't shielding or dodging, would get inflicted with a debuff represented by a shadowy eye symbol that hangs above them. What does it do? As long as it's there, Decidueye's attacks would bypass their evasive maneuvers by hitting through their dodges and intangibility frames. Anyone caught by Foresight would be forced to either shield or avoid everything Decidueye sends their way, making an already strong zoning game even more of a threat. But it'd only be a short-term game changer. Foresight's effects would only last about 10 seconds, and every time an afflicted opponent would be hit out of a dodge, the timer would have 3 seconds of its duration chopped off. There'd also be some kind of diminishing returns on its use, like with Witch Time. Spam it and it won't last nearly as long as if you saved it for the right moment. Now imagine the synergy between this thing and Spirit Shackle, a move that can prevent movement and a move that can render dodges useless. Decidueye's final smash is one that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who picked Rowlet as their starter. Pokemon Sun and Moon introduced a new mechanic in the form of Z moves, special limit break-like attacks that can be called on once per battle. There's one Z move for every type, as well as a handful of them that are exclusive to specific mons, and the Alola starters happen to be among them. Empowered by the energy of a Smash Ball, Decidueye would create a pillar of ethereal energy in front of him, Anyone caught in the pillar finds themselves on the receiving end of Decidueye's signature Z move as performed straight from the games. And that is what Decidueye could be like in Smash. A shadowy avian sniper with the power of nature on his side, taking aim from a safe distance and using special techniques to set targets up for the finishing blow. It's a real shame that Pokemon doesn't get a whole lot of attention in Smash speculation most of the time. A lot of people get so caught up in the games they grew up with that they overlook the new ones and the characters from them that have so much untapped potential. Which is a pretty big oversight, considering that's what we know Sakurai looks for. And those speculators are really missing out. Generation 7 looks to be one of the best yet, and a lot of the new mons have already become fan favorites. In fact, I don't think it's out of the question that we could see more than one new Pokemon if this Switch port of Smash 4 has enough new content planned. This time we went over Gen 7's Greninja, but next episode, we'll be talking about its Lucario. If you've enjoyed this episode or even the series as a whole, I'd appreciate any support you can show. If you want to subscribe, make sure you also click the little bell icon down there so YouTube will actually tell you when new content is up. Or if you want another option, I'm also on Twitter under the same name. So, see you next time. And if you're still stuck on that Totem Lurantis, try debuffing its stats.